remember the exact moment I realized how close my friend and I had been to someone capable of murder. It wasn't when we first saw him. It wasn't even when the campground staff warned everyone the next morning. It was years later, when I was lying awake one night and suddenly thought about how quiet that amusement park had been when we saw him. Too quiet. If that man had decided to walk the other direction instead of running across that patch of light, he would have been standing right in front of us. And considering what we learned the next day, I'm not sure either of us would have walked away from that encounter. I've never liked camping. Some people love it. They talk about fresh air, the peaceful sounds of nature, and escaping the stress of everyday life. To me, camping always felt like willingly choosing discomfort. Dirt everywhere, mosquitoes that seemed to single me out like a buffet, and sleeping bags that somehow turned into rocks by morning. Unfortunately, whether I liked it or not didn't matter. My dad loved camping. He was one of those rugged, outdoorsy types who believed every kid should grow up knowing how to start a fire with 2 sticks and survive a weekend without electricity. Every summer while I was growing up, he would drag me along with a group of his equally outdoorsy friends on a camping trip somewhere deep in the woods. I never had a choice. By the time I was a sophomore in high school, I had reached my breaking point. That year, I finally convinced him to let me bring a friend along. My reasoning was simple. If I was going to spend 3 miserable days in the woods, I at least wanted someone my age there to suffer with me. To my surprise, my dad agreed pretty quickly. So I brought my friend Charles. Now, ironically, Charles was probably the worst person I could have chosen if my goal was to complain about camping. Back when we were younger, he had been a Boy Scout and actually loved being outdoors. But the difference was, Charles had a sense of humor about it. He teased me constantly about hating camping, but he never acted like one of those people who thought you were less of a man if you preferred a comfortable bed over sleeping on the ground. And honestly, I figured if things went wrong, having someone around who actually knew how to pitch a tent or start a fire might not be the worst thing in the world. The trip started out badly, almost immediately. One of my dad's friends had made the reservation for the campsite weeks earlier. Apparently, he misunderstood something during the booking process. Instead of the quiet, remote campsite my dad had imagined, we ended up at a place that barely felt like camping at all. The place had paved walking paths, indoor bathrooms, even a small playground for kids. It felt less like camping and more like some weird outdoor resort. My dad was furious, but the real surprise came a few hours later when we discovered what was located right next to the campground. An amusement park. I'm completely serious. A full amusement park with rides, carnival games, lights, and a massive roller coaster towering over the trees. It was one of the strangest things I'd ever seen. On one side, you had tents and campfires. On the other side, you had flashing lights and roller coasters. The two environments didn't belong anywhere near each other. Everyone in our group hated it. My dad and his friends spent most of the afternoon complaining that it wasn't real camping. Charles didn't help the situation either. He kept making jokes about how this trip had been downgraded from wilderness survival to backyard glamping. Eventually, my dad and the others stopped complaining long enough to start setting up camp. And this was where Charles decided to show off. Within minutes, he had our tent set up perfectly. Every knot was tight, every stake was in place, and the rain cover was secured like something straight out of an instruction manual. Even my dad gave him an approving nod. For some reason, that annoyed me more than it should have. Charles and I were sharing a tent, and after dinner, we slipped away under the excuse of organizing our gear. The truth was, Charles had brought something else along for the trip. He pulled out a small metal pipe and an Altoids tin containing a little weed. Back then, we were going through that rebellious phase where doing dumb things felt exciting simply because we weren't supposed to be doing them. So we snuck off into the trees behind the campsite. A few minutes later, we were sitting on a fallen log, laughing quietly to ourselves while the smell of smoke drifted through the woods. We weren't worried about getting caught. We figured we'd probably stay away from the adults for the rest of the night anyway. Eventually, we made our way back to the tent. But after a few hours of sitting around talking, neither of us felt tired at all. That's when Charles got the look on his face, the one that meant he had a bad idea. He leaned over and whispered, "We should explore." At first, I thought he meant wandering around the campground. Then he tilted his head toward the amusement park. That immediately got my attention. The park had closed hours earlier, but we could still see the dark outline of the rides beyond the fence. Charles grinned. "Imagine climbing to the top of that roller coaster," he said. Climbing things had always been something we loved doing back then. Abandoned buildings, water towers, construction sites. If there was something tall nearby, we wanted to climb it. So once we were sure everyone at our campsite was asleep, we grabbed our flashlights and slipped into the darkness. The fence around the amusement park wasn't hard to climb. Charles boosted me up. I pulled him over, and within seconds we were standing inside the empty park. Everything looked completely different without the lights. It felt like we had stepped into a giant abandoned movie set. But the place wasn't completely empty. Security guards were patrolling the park. Every so often, we would hear the distant hum of a golf cart moving along the pathways. So we moved slowly, staying in the shadows and ducking behind buildings whenever we heard a guard approaching. It honestly felt like we were inside some stealth video game. At one point, we had to sprint across an open stretch of pavement to avoid being spotted. My heart was pounding the entire time. Finally, we reached the base of the roller coaster. Up close, the structure was massive. The maintenance staircase ran along the side of the track, disappearing into the darkness above. We started climbing. The metal steps creaked quietly under our weight as we made our way higher and higher. About halfway up, the guardrails disappeared for a section of the staircase. Looking down made my stomach drop. But we kept climbing. Eventually, we reached the top. The view was incredible. From up there, we could see the entire amusement park below us, along with the dim lights of the campground in the distance. Charles took a quick photo with his phone. Then we decided it was time to head back down before we pushed our luck too far. The climb down was faster. Within a few minutes, we were back on the ground, making our way toward the fence we had climbed earlier. We were almost there when we had to stop. A security guard was driving past in a golf cart, so we ducked behind a small snack stand and waited for him to pass. That's when I saw something move in the darkness. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. But then Charles grabbed my arm and pointed. About 30 feet away, between two buildings, someone else was crouching in the shadows, just like we were. For a moment, none of us moved. Then the figure suddenly ran across an open patch of ground. He passed directly through a beam of light from a nearby street lamp. And for a split second, I saw his face. It was a man. His clothes were torn and dirty. He was limping slightly as he ran. But the most disturbing detail was the dark liquid smeared across his face and chest. It looked like blood. Charles had seen it too. Neither of us said a word. The man disappeared behind another building. A few seconds later, the guard finally drove past. We didn't stick around to find out where the man had gone. We hurried back to the fence, climbed over it, and ran all the way to our campsite. Neither of us laughed about the adventure anymore. That night, we lay awake in the tent, trying to convince ourselves the man had just been some injured homeless person wandering through the area. But neither of us really believed that. The next morning, we woke up early and started packing our gear. Around 10 o'clock, one of the campground staff members walked around announcing something to all the campers. The night before, a man had been stabbed and killed at a lake about 4 miles away. The person responsible hadn't been caught. The suspect was described as a disheveled white male in his late 30s, possibly injured, possibly covered in blood. Charles and I slowly looked at each other. We knew exactly who they were talking about. But we didn't say anything. Not to the staff, not to the police, not even to my dad. At the time, we were just scared of getting in trouble for sneaking into the amusement park. Looking back, I wish we had spoken up. Because every time I think about that night, I realize something that still makes my skin crawl. That man had been only a few yards away from us in the darkness. And if he had decided to come a little closer, there's a very real chance we never would have made it back to that tent. If that story made your heart race, make sure you subscribe right now, because the next story gets even more disturbing. But before we continue, I want to ask you something. What do you think that man was really doing inside that closed amusement park that night? Was he just hiding? Or were my friend and I a lot closer to danger than we realized? Let me know what you think down in the comments. I read every single one. The clown didn't say a single word. He just stood in the train doorway, staring at me, while the doors slowly started to close behind him. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought it had to be some kind of joke. Maybe a street performer. Maybe someone trying to get a laugh out of people on the train. But then he leaned down so our faces were inches apart. And that's when I realized something about his expression that made my stomach drop. He wasn't smiling. This happened back in October of 2016, during that strange period when the internet was flooded with creepy clown sightings. If you were alive back then, you probably remember it. Social media was full of videos of clowns standing in forests, walking down empty streets at night, or appearing in random public places. Most people assumed it was just teenagers trying to scare people for attention. At the time, I thought the same thing, until the day one of them chased me through a subway station with what looked like a kitchen knife. I was 16 years old then, a junior in high school. It was a normal weekday afternoon. School had just ended, and I was heading home like I always did. My routine rarely changed. I would take the train uptown, get off at the same stop, and walk the rest of the way home. That day didn't feel any different. The train I boarded was unusually quiet, though. Normally, there were at least a few students from my school or commuters heading home, but that afternoon, the car I stepped into was almost empty. At the time, I didn't think much about it. If anything, it felt nice having the space to myself. I slid into a seat near the middle of the train and immediately pulled out my phone. I had a chemistry test coming up, so I was flipping through digital flashcards while listening to music through my headphones. My attention was completely buried in my phone. Between the loud music and the studying, I probably wouldn't have noticed if something strange was happening around me. The train stopped at a couple stations along the way, but I barely paid attention. Eventually, we reached my stop. I recognized the familiar slowdown of the train and instinctively stood up before the doors even opened. I had taken that route so many times that getting off the train had become automatic. Without even looking up from my phone, I walked toward the doors. That was my first mistake. When the train finally came to a stop, the doors slid open with their usual mechanical sound. But instead of stepping onto the platform like I expected, I nearly walked straight into someone standing directly in the doorway. I stopped abruptly. For a second, my brain struggled to process what I was looking at. The person blocking the doorway was dressed as a clown. Not the friendly kind you might see at a birthday party. This one looked exaggerated and unsettling. His clothes were oversized and brightly colored, huge rainbow-patterned pants, a baggy yellow shirt held up by red suspenders, and massive red shoes that looked almost cartoonish. His face was covered in thick white makeup. Bright red paint formed a wide mouth across his lips, and sharp blue shapes were drawn above his eyes like exaggerated eyebrows. The makeup looked sloppy, though, almost smeared. And unlike most clowns, he wasn't wearing a wig. His dark hair stuck out messily around the edges of the paint. At first, I thought maybe he was just another passenger trying to get on the train. But then I realized something strange. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, blocking the doorway, staring directly at me. The doors behind him started making that warning sound that signals they're about to close. I had maybe 5 seconds to get off the train before it continued to the next station. "Excuse me," I muttered automatically as I tried to step past him. The moment my shoulder brushed against him, he suddenly bent down toward me. It was a quick, fluid movement, like he was intentionally trying to bring his face directly in front of mine. Our eyes met, and that's when I saw the expression beneath the makeup. There was no humor there, no sign that this was some harmless prank. His eyes looked completely serious, almost angry. Something in my brain screamed that something was very wrong. Instinct took over. I shoved past him and sprinted out of the train onto the platform. Behind me, I heard the heavy thud of his oversized shoes hitting the ground. Then I heard something worse. Running. I glanced over my shoulder. The clown was chasing me. He moved in a strange, jerky way as he ran, like his limbs weren't moving in a normal rhythm. But what really terrified me was the object now visible in his hand. It looked like a kitchen knife. I didn't stop to double check. I just ran. The subway platform was almost completely empty. My footsteps echoed loudly as I sprinted toward the staircase leading up to the street. I could hear the clown's shoes slapping against the concrete behind me. The sound was getting closer. Adrenaline flooded my body as I took the stairs 2 at a time. My legs felt like they were moving faster than they ever had before. At one point, I risked another glance back. The clown was halfway up the staircase, still chasing me, still holding the knife. I burst out onto the street, gasping for air. Luckily, the street above the station had people walking around. The sudden presence of other people must have scared him off. When I looked back down the staircase, he was gone. Just like that, my hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called the police. Within a few minutes, 2 officers arrived and went down into the station to check the area. They searched the platform, the stairwells, and even the train that had just passed through. But the clown had disappeared. It was like he had simply melted into the city. The officers asked me a bunch of questions: what he looked like, what he was wearing, whether I recognized him. Of course, I didn't. The only thing I could describe was the makeup, the oversized clothes, and the knife. They told me I had done the right thing by running and reporting it immediately. Still, even after they reassured me everything was under control, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched during the walk home. For weeks afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about that moment when the train doors opened and he was standing there waiting. Because the more I replayed it in my head, the more it felt like he hadn't just been standing there randomly. It felt like he had been waiting for someone, waiting in that doorway, blocking the exit, just to see who would step off the train first. And that day, it happened to be me. If that encounter with the clown creeped you out, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel, because the next story is even more disturbing. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss any future uploads of true horror stories. But before we move on, I want to ask you something. Do you think that clown randomly chose me? Or was he actually waiting for someone to step off that train? Let me know what you think down in the comments. I read every single one. The job paid $30 an hour, and that alone should have been my first warning that something wasn't right. At the time, I was desperate for work. I had graduated from college about 2 years earlier and was in that strange phase of life where you're technically an adult, but you still don't really know what direction your life is going. I was taking a few online graduate courses while trying to earn money however I could. Some weeks I worked delivery gigs. Other weeks, I picked up temporary jobs wherever someone needed an extra pair of hands. Most of my job searches happened late at night while scrolling through listings online. That's how I found the posting. At first glance, it looked simple enough. Private lifeguard needed for hotel pool. $30 an hour. The hotel was located in a small town a few miles away, which meant I'd have to drive a bit, but for that kind of pay, I didn't mind at all. But the more I read the listing, the stranger it became. The first unusual detail was the hours. Most hotel pools are open during the day, right? Morning to evening, maybe closing around sunset. This job was the complete opposite. The shift ran from 5 p.m. until 1 a.m., a night shift for a swimming pool. That alone felt strange. But the next detail was even stranger. The listing specifically stated they were looking for someone who did not speak Spanish. That requirement made absolutely no sense to me. The town where the hotel was located had a large Hispanic population. Most businesses in the area actually preferred employees who could speak both English and Spanish. And here was a job doing the exact opposite. The thing was, I spoke Spanish fluently. My mother was Mexican, and I had grown up speaking it at home. So technically, I didn't meet the requirement. But when I saw the pay again, I convinced myself it didn't matter. My plan was simple. If anyone asked, I'd just pretend I didn't understand Spanish. It sounded stupid, but I figured the worst that could happen was they'd realize it later. So I applied. To my surprise, I got a response within a few hours. They wanted me to come in the next day. The hotel itself looked completely normal when I arrived. Nothing about it stood out. It was the kind of mid-sized hotel you'd see along the highway near tourist areas. Clean lobby, simple landscaping, nothing suspicious. As soon as I parked, a short, heavy-set guy came walking toward me from the entrance. He had a friendly smile and greeted me warmly. He introduced himself as Esteban. We shook hands and started talking as we walked toward the pool area behind the building. Esteban was easygoing and talkative, which helped calm some of the nerves I had about the strange job listing. But that feeling didn't last long. As we walked through the hallway leading to the pool, another man turned the corner and stopped directly in front of us. He was taller, thinner, and his expression was much more serious. He stared at me in silence for a few seconds. Then he suddenly began speaking to me in Spanish. Not aggressively, just casual conversation. Something about the weather, but I instantly understood what was happening. He was testing me, trying to see if I understood the language, so I did exactly what I had planned. I gave him a blank, confused expression. After a few seconds, I shrugged slightly and looked at Esteban. The tall man stared at me for another moment. Then suddenly both of them burst out laughing. The tall man switched to English and said he was just joking around. He introduced himself as Jefe. Apparently, he was the one in charge. From there, everything seemed relatively normal. They walked me out to the pool area and explained the job. The pool would stay open late because they planned to charge non-hotel guests a small fee to use it during evening hours. My job was simple. Watch the pool, collect money from anyone who wasn't staying at the hotel, and if any problems happened, call Jefe. There was only one additional instruction. Behind the pool area stood a large building they referred to as the pool house. Jefe told me that if anyone showed me a blue wristband, I was supposed to unlock the door and allow them inside. He didn't explain what was in the building. I didn't ask. The pay was good, and at the time I didn't feel like questioning it. For the first couple weeks, the job felt almost too easy. People came to swim in the evenings, especially locals who wanted somewhere to cool off after work. I collected entrance fees and watched the water. Every now and then, someone would show me a blue wristband, and I would unlock the door to the pool house like I had been told. They would disappear inside for a while, then leave. I never saw what was happening inside that building. But eventually, I started noticing strange things. For one, some people were paying way more than the entrance fee. If the pool cost $10, they might hand me $50, sometimes even $100. When I tried to give them change, they waved it off like it didn't matter. At first, I thought it was just generous tipping, but it happened too often to feel like coincidence. So one night I called Jefe and told him people were overpaying. He cut me off almost immediately. "Don't worry about it," he said. Then he hung up before I could finish my sentence. That was the moment the first real suspicion formed in my mind. I started paying closer attention. More people with blue wristbands began showing up. They would enter the pool house carrying small bags or backpacks. When they came back out, those bags often looked heavier. And because I understood Spanish, I occasionally overheard pieces of conversation that confirmed my growing suspicion. Money, drugs, deals, whatever was happening inside that building, it definitely wasn't related to swimming. Still, I stayed. $30 an hour was hard to walk away from. Plus, technically I wasn't doing anything illegal. I was just a lifeguard. At least that's what I told myself. One evening, something happened that made me feel strangely accepted by the people who frequented the pool. A small kid wandered too far into the deep end and started struggling. I jumped in and pulled him out before anything serious happened. The kid was shaken but fine. Everyone around the pool applauded. A few minutes later, one of the men approached me and thanked me personally. It turned out the kid I had saved was his son. The next day, when I arrived for my shift, several of the regulars were waiting near the gate. They greeted me like a hero. One of them even poured me a glass of wine and proposed a toast. At first, it felt nice. But then one of the men made a speech in Spanish. He was laughing as he spoke, talking about the money they were making and the lives they were ruining. Everyone around him laughed and drank, except me. That was the moment the situation stopped feeling harmless. The next day, something happened that nearly got me killed. While working my shift, my phone rang. It was my mother. She almost never called unless something important was happening. So I stepped away from the lifeguard stand and answered. Like always, we spoke in Spanish. After a few minutes, the call ended and I turned around to walk back toward the pool. That's when I saw Esteban standing a few feet away, watching me. His expression was completely different from the friendly smile I remembered from my first day. Cold, suspicious, he walked toward me slowly. "How long have you known Spanish?" he asked. My heart started pounding. I tried to play it off. I told him I had just been practicing with a friend, but I could tell he didn't believe me. He stared at me for several seconds in silence. In that moment, I honestly thought he might hurt me. Then suddenly he nodded once. "Okay," he said quietly, and walked away. The rest of that shift was the longest hour of my life. I sat in the lifeguard chair, convinced they were deciding what to do with me. Whether I had seen too much, whether I understood too much. A few minutes before my shift ended, Esteban returned. He told me to come in an hour early the next day. He said they had a new opportunity for me. Then he handed me a couple $100 in cash as a tip and walked away. That night, I drove home and never went back. I didn't call. I didn't explain. I simply disappeared from the job. For months afterward, I was constantly paranoid. Every unfamiliar car that drove down my street made my heart race. I kept wondering if someone from that hotel was looking for me. Luckily, nothing ever happened. But even years later, there's one thing about that experience I still can't stop thinking about. Why did they hire me in the first place? My best guess is that they needed someone on payroll who looked like a normal employee, someone who could act clueless if authorities ever showed up, a witness who technically wasn't involved, someone expendable. And when Esteban realized I understood everything that had been happening around that pool, I'm almost certain he spent a few seconds deciding whether I should leave that place alive. If you enjoyed these real-life horror stories, make sure to like the video and comment which story scared you the most. Story 1, Story 2, or Story 3. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our future creepy uploads.